Hello, everybody. My name is France Daviault from the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, and you're listening to Tools of the Trade Monthly Toolbox Talk.
Welcome, please welcome
to another episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast, your number one construction industry resource. Hear conversations with industry professionals to get the tools, stories, and advice that you need to set your career on fire. You're now streaming the Tools of the Trade podcast.
The Tools of the Trade Monthly Toolbox Talks are proudly presented by the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. Over the past 20 years, the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum has undertaken a broad range of research projects that align with both national and regional areas of interest, including completion rates, barriers to apprenticeship training, employer engagement, the impact of technology, return on training investment, and youth/parent perceptions of careers in the skilled trades. They have developed a number of employer-specific resources that are available for distribution, including an introduction to apprenticeship training, an employer handbook to share the business cases for apprenticeship training, as well as an employer insights and a series of one-pagers designed to help employers think through the creation of their own apprenticeship program. They also just launched a quarterly newsletter for skilled trades employers. You can access these super valuable resources at their website, which is CAF-FCA.org. Again, if you want these resources, please visit their website at caf-fca.org. What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning to episode number 10 of the Tools of the Trade Monthly Toolbox Talks. I'm your host, Colin Toop, and in this Toolbox Talk segment, I sat down with France Daviault, the Executive Director of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, to talk all things apprenticeship and some of the key areas of contention in our industry. France has a communications degree which she has paired with her love for helping others, and that really comes through in this conversation. You'll pick it up immediately. She has seen the automotive aftermarket industry, is currently enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves as a trainer. She led the Awake project traveling across Canada and the US talking to women in industry, and is now leading the National Initiative for Women in Skilled Trades. France is such an amazing woman, and she shared some eye-opening apprentice success stories, broke down the stigmas of blue-collar careers, dove into the disconnect between employers and apprentices, and spoke at length about how we have been addressing some of our skills gap concerns with the wrong messaging. Whether you are interested in getting into the skilled trades, you currently work in the field, or an employer, you cannot miss the insights left behind by France in this episode. To get in touch with France and for show notes and links to everything mentioned, pop over to toolspodcast.com/FRANCE. And I felt that she really deserved her own page because there's so much good info here. So she's not going to be on the regular Toolbox Talks page. She's going to be on her own. So that's toolspodcast.com/France, or France as you say it correctly. And for more information about the CAF and the amazing work that they do, check out CAF-FCA.org. Please join me in welcoming, well, at least according to France, my kindred spirit, France Daviault. France Daviault, the name that I've had so much trouble pronouncing in my mind all day. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition, which I think will be the July edition of the Tools of the Trade Monthly Toolbox Talk.
I'm so happy to be here, and you said it perfectly, so no worries at all.
I'm very excited to talk to you. You, as well as CAF, have been huge supporters of mine, which has meant a lot. So I want to thank you first off. And I think the work that your organization and yourself in your career, which we'll get into, has done so much good for the industry. So I thought the best place to start would be setting the stage with an introduction of yourself, who you are, where you work, which is obviously the CAF, but you can go into a bit of detail, and what exactly it is that you do.
Sure. Well, like I said, my name is France, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. And I joined in October 2018, so a little bit over a year and a half. The Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, we're located in Ottawa. We have an office in Ottawa. We've been around for 20 years. So it's the 20th anniversary of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum this year. And what we've been doing for these 20 years is research around apprenticeship and the skilled trades, but not just research. I think what we do best in Canada is that we take that research and then we get people together And we talk about the research and we have them talk to each other and identify what to do now. Like, what's the next step now that we have this data? So over the 20 years, we've been really lucky that, our stakeholders are unions, colleges, employers, apprentices, government, federal government, provincial government, like everyone that cares about apprenticeship is at the table. And so over 20 years, we've been able to get all the people together to chat about what are the issues and how do we collectively address them. That's what we do best. And I think it's what we're most proud of over the years. And I know that's what my successor had said to me when I joined the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. She said to me, this is all about the people and the passionate people. So we produce and publish reports based on research data throughout the year. We're a membership organization, so we do have paying members that help us, keep the lights on and things like that. And we have events where we bring people together, and that's what we do.
Now, what do you do as the executive director? Because that's quite a title. I'm sure you have a lot of responsibilities, but what exactly does a day to day look like for you?
People are just shocked when I tell them that we're only 5 people working at the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum because
Yeah.
the output is so huge.
Yeah.
The staff are great. And so my job is to do the business management, the organizational management part of it, finance. A lot of it is board governance, working with the board and then managing staff. But a lot of it too is, and what I think is the most fun for me is identifying, okay, what should CAF be doing next? Like, where do we go next? What kind of research should we be doing? And that you get that information through talking to people. And so when I joined the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, 70% of my job was traveling around Canada, meeting with people. And, that's changed obviously in the current environment, but thank goodness for Zoom. And there is such thing as Zoom fatigue. I know, but like,
Oh, yeah.
it's a real thing. So I get to meet people and I get to hear their stories. And then I get to figure out what kind of platform CAF can give them as an organization. Like, how far can we push the envelope? What kind of research can we do to support whatever this group is going through or this particular challenge? So that's what I do, and it's really fun. And I have a
Yeah.
great staff, and they do, the communications pieces and research and make sure that the financials are all in order. And our social media is pretty active these days. So they're really awesome people.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working with, I think I've touched every person in the organization at
I'm
some point or
sure, yeah.
another, and they've all been amazing. You know what's coming to mind that I never actually thought to ask is what are the origins of CAF? How did CAF actually get started?
That's a really good question. And so my understanding, and given, I've only been around for a little while, but the story is that the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum at one point was a sector council. So meaning that the federal government wanted to have a pool of people within the skilled trades that cared about apprenticeship that they could tap into for information. So they funded, just like the construction sector councils, they had an apprenticeship sort of sector council, and all these stakeholders got together. And that's what they would discuss. So it was funded, by the federal government at the time. Now, federal governments change over time. And so back around 2008, the sector council funding was no longer available. So the people that participated didn't want CAF to die. They wanted it to keep going. And so they decided to come together and make it an organization, incorporate it with Industry Canada as a non-for-profit. They put a board together, bylaws, and made it the membership organization that it is today so that there would still be a place for stakeholders to go and talk about apprenticeship.
So, given the fact that the CAF is roughly 20 years old now, we're going to get into a lot of this stuff here in a minute, but do you think that they were experiencing some of the same issues that we are today back then, and that's why it started?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I look back at some of the old minutes and they're still talking about employer engagement way back then. How long have people been talking about a skills gap in the skilled trades? Longer than I've been in this job.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we haven't made progress. Obviously, there's been some progress made, and some of the research that CAF has done has led to, I would say, informing some policy around apprenticeship at the provincial level over the years, and informed employers about the benefits of apprenticeship. And so over the years, like, we've produced and published some pretty significant research, but still, and we're going to talk about this later, I think, how do we move past always talking about these things
Yeah.
and moving to concrete action? Like, I don't think it's rocket science to address some of these never-ending conversations. I just think it takes someone to feel the accountability. The apprenticeship, the Red Seal standards were harmonized over the last few years. That's a great thing. Like, so there's a lot of good things that have been done in apprenticeship. There's still a long way to go.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say the minutes back then still touched on some of the same issues, because now just thinking about my own personal journey 14 years ago when I started in the trade, that was one of the things that was being talked about back then as well. And it's interesting to see that it's progressed, but we're still having these conversations now. So the next place I want to go is just a little bit more background on yourself, which is, what did you want to be when you grew up? Because I have a
Oh,
whole
geez.
series of questions to ask after, but I want to know what was going on in your mind when you were a child.
Oh, well, I was a good child, never trouble. My dad was RCMP. He's retired now. And yeah, I wanted to be a police officer. And I remember being a teenager and my dad saying, like, nope. I guess he had seen things and stuff like that. So he was like, don't be a police officer. So, anyways, so I went to university and took that path, and doors opened. And my first job was for working for corporate America. I won't name the company because they're still around in Ottawa. It was really corporate America. And I so did not fit there. So I stayed there for a little bit and went on to other things. I think I'm skipping ahead here, but the bottom line is I was a good kid, wanted to be a cop.
So yeah, I mean, that definitely ties into just my curiosity about your career path, because I was doing research on you and you keep yourself
Oh, no.
pretty low key. So I've had to ask a few of
Yes.
our mutual contacts to get a bit more information about you.
Oh,
But
boy.
you've done so many great things. You've got a communications background. You were in the automotive industry. I believe we've had to cancel a meeting because you had to go to the reserves for a weekend.
That's right.
You led the Awake Project, traveling across Canada, talking to women in the industry. And now you're the director of CAF and leading the national initiative for women in trade. So how does it all fit together? Like, walk me through the progression of wanting to be a cop to finding your way into this career path.
Yeah, well, the reason I wanted to be a cop is because I wanted to help people. And that just to me seemed like an obvious way to do it. But what I found throughout my career is I've gravitated towards careers where I can do it in a different way. I like the business aspect. I like managing an organization, getting into the financials and doing strategic planning and planning out a, 5-year plan. I love that stuff. But what I love more is that I get to deal with people. And the first time I realized that was I worked for the Children's Aid Society in Ottawa. And that just blew my mind. Like, that took me out of my bubble, working with families. And at the time, I was given the responsibility for working with Indigenous families in Ottawa and figuring out how child welfare can best work with Indigenous families and newcomer families. And that's when I realized that I really enjoyed bringing people together and using whatever tool I had to give them a voice. And this wasn't about me. This was about using the tools that I had to give them a voice. And so that led to me going back to school. I had 2 kids at home and I was working full time and did my master's full time and got my master's in comms and communications, international and intercultural communications. And that again just expanded my appreciation for working with people. And I saw this job in the automotive industry and I thought, well, this is could be interesting. I know nothing about automotive, but I do know about engaging stakeholders. And so took that job and realized right away that I could use the platform to do some good. And that was creating the Advancing Women in Automotive Knowledge Exchange. So the acronym is AWAKE. And traveling across Canada and the US to talk about those things. And it's similar to what ended up happening at the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, where all I do is I go out and talk to people and I listen to their experiences. And then whenever I have an opportunity because of my job to have visibility or have a platform, I give it to them and I tell them, like, what is your story? What needs to change? And that's what I feel is very compelling about these jobs. I have an adventurous streak in me. And so when I was 17, I joined the reserve, the Army Reserve, with the regiment, it's combat arms, which was the reconnaissance platoon in Hull, and loved it. And then I had to figure out my career path. So I left that for a little while, but I re-enlisted in my 40s. Like I re-enlisted, sounds crazy, because I was missing it. And I thought, well, I'm looking for some adventure. So I'm going to re-enlist as an Army reservist. And here I am. So I get to work with the young people. So I get to work with a local Army Cadet Corps and work with young people, see them through the program. And again, it's about just like watching them grow into productive young adults. And that just jazzes me. So yeah, I like people.
Yeah,
That's it.
it sounds like it. And you kind of mentioned that you fell into meeting more people, talking to more people, loving more people. But where do you think that comes from? Do you think it comes from something that you picked up from your childhood, or like everything you've done, in my opinion, is so selfless? Like we need 1,000 or 1,000,000 Frances in this
Yes,
world.
please. That's way too nice. I grew up, like I said, my dad was our CMP and we moved around a lot. He was posted usually in little towns in Saskatchewan and usually attached to an Indigenous community. And, I remember being a little bit of an advocate there whenever he'd come home and talk about his day. And so I don't know, I've always been kind of like an outsider trying to use what I could to give people a voice. I think that's what makes me feel good. And I'm part of one of those communities that typically has been marginalized. So I'm part of the LGBTQ community. I have a partner and we have a farm in out of Ottawa. So I guess I've always just been an advocate for people in general. And yeah, it's funny that I've gravitated towards jobs that allows me to do that, even though there's a heavy business corporate component.
Yeah.
It's the best of both worlds, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you have any stories from all of your dealings with youth, with women, with Indigenous people, just anything that you've picked up along your career that has kind of really solidified the work that you're doing or given you that renewed sense of purpose that you're definitely doing the right thing? Does anything come to mind?
Well, when I was hearing story, and I'll relate it to CAF because it's so topical these days with our strategy for women in trades. But I'm not from the skilled trades, and my family isn't from the skilled trades. Like I don't come from that world. And conversations with women who have been working in the skilled trades for 20 years, like or more, and hearing their stories of perseverance and resilience. Wow, that's inspiring. Like when I was working in the automotive industry, we were having these women's conferences that we had started. And, I was trying to find a guest speaker and I can't even, I was thinking about it for today and I couldn't remember how I came across being connected to this young woman from Nova Scotia who had worked in the oil fields in camps in Alberta. And unfortunately, and I'm not saying it's like this everywhere, and I'm hoping it's better, but hearing her stories of things that she was subjected to in the camps, when you mix that with a real belief that there's so many opportunities in these careers, you feel like you have to do something. And that particular speaker, that young woman, really sort of inspired me to continue along the lines of that work. And anytime I have the opportunity to go and visit some of our stakeholders that are in Indigenous communities, like I had the opportunity to go up north in Thompson, Manitoba, and then to the Indigenous community up there to see the great work that they're doing, fully understanding, and I'm continuing to learn, by the way, of the impacts of residential schools and the impacts of colonialization on the Indigenous communities. I continue to learn, but I have an appreciation of the struggles and the generational struggles that it caused. And when I have the opportunity to go to these communities and I see they're building schools, they're creating their businesses, solar panel businesses to sustain employment for the youth, like they're doing such great things like that. That's inspiring. And people need to know about those things. So those things keep me inspired because there's always a great inspiring story around the corner. There's tons of good stuff happening.
Why do you think that these stories aren't highlighted as much as they should be? Like, even just you mentioning how progressive the First Nations are becoming in Nelson with solar panel businesses and all of the great things that people have achieved. Why do you think that that isn't showcased a lot more? Like, because I've been around in this industry for so long, and you don't normally see these success stories portrayed on a regular basis to really showcase and highlight the good that's coming out of everything. There's a lot of focus on the negative and not the progression and how far we've come. It's always, but we have so much further to go. But maybe I'd like to hear your opinion on why.
I don't know that I can give like a really astute answer on that other than people are busy in their own lives and in their own little bubble. And, what you hear in social media or in the news is, it's so typical of hearing not great news stories. The great news stories don't usually get noticed. It's like, when someone has a complaint about a product they've just purchased, you'll hear about those, but who calls in a 1-800 number to say, oh, the product I purchased was so fantastic, thank you?
Yeah.
Like nobody does that. But I think that's part of what, as an organization, I want CAF to do more of. And that is like, we're in a perfect position to be able to highlight this great work. So, how can we do that? We use social media, we use our networks, and we're starting to do a lot more of those and, webinars around what's happening and the great stuff that's going on. People are, I think, craving good news stories. It's just who's going to take the time to offer everyone a platform to do it. So I think that talking to with you today, it's a good reminder that we could do more to do that for sure.
Yeah, I sure hope so.
Good point.
Now, I want to get into some of the meat of this interview, which is around apprenticeship. And for decades, governments, parents, even teachers, everybody's been pushing for the university career path,
Yeah.
and that has stigmatized apprenticeship, and it's still perceived largely as an inferior qualification. What's come up a lot in my interviews lately, especially since launching the Toolbox Talks and focusing more on apprenticeship, has been the second choice pathway. And most of the people that I've talked to, I'd say almost 90%, it was their second choice to get into the industry, not their first choice because it wasn't showcased as a first choice. And I was curious how you think we can further help change the optics and the perceptions of what one might call a blue collar industry.
Yeah. If people had the answer to that, the things would have been addressed a long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, we know through some of the CAF research and other research, it's not rocket science. The biggest influencers in a young person's career choice is the parents, right? So this generation, I don't want to say older because, I'm part of that. So I don't want to put myself in there. But I have a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old sons. And I don't know that if I had not been working in this field, because I went to university myself because that's what my parents expected of me, like I would just generationally have the same expectation. So the generations have made it so over the past. And the teachers, the educators in school are also all university educated.
Right.
So when they're going and they're talking to young people in the schools, they're coming from a place of, well, they've been given the information about the potential in the skilled trades. It's not lived experience. So, they'll talk about it perhaps if they see a student that has some potential. But the other thing that's happened is somewhere along the line in the curriculum or somewhere along the line in education, if you weren't academically astute, so if you weren't an academic, you would be the ones that the teachers or the counselors would say, hey, have you thought about the skilled trades? So we need to work on that as well, because as you know, working in the skilled trades, you need math, you need, some science. And so that hasn't helped. So the role of educators now is to stop that. So stop streamlining kids in your schools according to their academic potential. So you need to take that out of the equation because it has, no bearing on whether or not you should be in the skilled trades. What does is whether or not you have an interest in doing something productive in society. Like you talk to the people that, and I don't have to tell you this, but the people that I've talked to that have careers in the skilled trades, they take such pride. Like, I built that school, or I built that hospital, or I did the electrical in there. And there's such pride in the work, and you can see it every day. It's visible for people. An educator should say, hey, that youth cares about their community. Like, I see them volunteering, I see them giving back. I should talk to them about if they've ever thought about doing something like the skilled trades where they can give back to the community by either building stuff or fixing things. So that conversation needs to happen. And we need to stop streamlining kids based on perceived intelligence in schools. Stop that. And talk to them at an early age. And when I say them, I mean, it doesn't matter the gender. Talk to everybody about the potentials in the skilled trades. And where the educators get stuck too is that because it's not a lived experience for them, they get stuck on just a few skilled trades that they've heard of, right? Or that they've seen on TV.
That's
So,
right.
they'll talk about, hey, well, you have an interest in the skilled trades. Have you thought about being an electrician or a plumber? But there are 300 trades, like how are you ever going to talk to the youth about all of them? So why don't you just send them to look up all the different trades and have them do an activity? So there's a lot of things within the secondary schools and the primary schools that can help with that. Promotion campaigns, like how do we change societal perception? So we're going to try and do it through the teachers first, and then we're going to try and do it with the parents. How on earth do you reach all the parents and change their mind?
Right.
I don't know, like promotional campaigns are really expensive. I think what you do is you empower the youth to seek out the information and you tell them to think for themselves. And, you make the opportunities available to the youth on social media where they are. That way, they can make informed decisions when they do happen to have those conversations with the parents. Because I don't know that anyone can go out and do a mass campaign across Canada to change parental views on the skilled trades.
More of Tools of the Trade in just a minute, but before we get back to the episode, I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Company Cam. Company Cam is your project photo organization solution, bar none, hands down, 100%. Every photo and video that your crews take at a job is now automatically organized by location and instantly synced from the field to wherever you are. Now you'll know exactly what's happening across your company, be able to communicate more effectively, and cover your butt from future claims. You can document your jobs, communicate with your crews, and protect your company all with Company Cam, the only app that every contractor needs. This app has been battle tested by me. I use it on my jobs as a project manager. Many guests on this podcast have also used Company Cam to organize their project photos, and it truly is your one-stop shop solution for organizing your company and your company photos. Company Cam is also now totally free. Believe it or not, if you want to take advantage of their free account, which is 3 users and up to 50 projects, you can head over to companycam.com/tools. You can upgrade at any time. Sign up is quick, it's easy, and no credit card is required. So you can start right now. To discover which plan fits your needs and to get your company started, head over again to companycam.com/tools to get your photos organized and take back control of your project photo organization. I was having a conversation with a mutual friend of ours, and we had some interesting thoughts on a few things. And this is by no means a fully baked idea, but one of the thoughts was a lot of parents, I wouldn't say all the parents, I don't want to paint them with a broad brush, but parents typically want the best for their children, meaning they want to ensure their career is set. So a lot of them are putting money aside to invest in their children's education in hopes that they're going to go away to college or university and achieve that degree and get a good paying job. And one of the things that research has been showing is the dropout rates or career paths has it changes. I think it's like, don't quote me on this, but it's something around 50% of students that enroll in college and universities either drop out or change career paths, which of course changing your educational career path midway through a college or university degree costs money. And so in a way to almost attract parents into this pathway is almost to say, we've got a huge shortage, meaning there's work right out of school. Education is relatively cheap, if not free, depending on grants and scholarships for skilled trades. And your child has the opportunity to make a six-figure salary relatively quick with no student loans, no debt. And if they like it, which we're assuming they do because they've done some research and they've chosen that pathway, then it's kind of a win-win for everybody. And the parents are able to see that path, and there is a lot of work there. And the other side to the story that we keep hearing is that all these kids go and get degrees and then there's no work for them. But we're in an industry that's like, we need everybody, let's go.
Yeah.
And it's available for you. And I think like something like that may or could tie into it at some point. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum and Skills Canada received some funding from the federal government to put together a promotional campaign that talks about that addresses that, like good, well-paying careers. Here's a sample of what you can expect as this type of trade worker. And, like the Ontario government too has just recently put out some cool ads, talking about well-paying jobs, meaningful careers. So yes, we need some of that for sure. And we need to continue with that messaging. The perception is not just for us to change the perception with youth and parents. It is for the industry to put some effort into addressing the perception. And by that, I mean being a more inclusive workplace, a clean workplace. So I think the industry has a part to play and has an accountability here and a role to address some of those perceptions that society, that the parents may have, in order to make those careers and those workplaces more attractive to the young people and their parents who are ultimately influencing them.
Hmm.
I remember working with a company in the automotive industry, and they're sitting around the table supporting the Advancing Women in Automotive project, and they're all on board. And I happened to one day go to one of the shops, one of the automotive shops, and walked in there, and there's still pinups on the walls. And so there's still some work to do there in order to attract this new generation of folks that care about the environment, they care about social justice, and they want to work for an employer that cares as well. So, yeah, I think there's a few players that need to get in the game.
Yeah, and I think you guys are doing a fantastic job with your social outreach through social media and your platforms. The other thing that comes to mind in terms of employer responsibility is, I've been doing a lot of reflecting and critical thinking since I started to get more involved in skilled trades awareness over the last year with the podcast. And now my whole lens in which I see the construction industry through has changed when I'm on site, because I'm on site every day. And I'm sitting through safety videos that were filmed in the 90s, where there's promotional and marketing material that when I look at it, I'm like, you know what? If I was even as old as I am now, 30, in my 30s, and I was thinking about pursuing this pathway, like I'm just not attracted to the content that you're providing me.
Yeah.
It still has a long way to go. And I'm confident that we'll get there. But I think that's another piece to it is you have to, like you guys are doing, engaging the apprentices and the youth and getting soliciting their feedback on their experiences. I think the same goes for the employer in asking their youth and the younger people in their companies, why do you like what you're doing, why do you like being here, and showcasing that aspect of it to speak to us. Because personal opinion here, if somebody my father's age was telling me to do it, I probably wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Some of the material is outdated, and the youth will, like you said, respond to someone that they can see themselves in the ads or in the posters or in the material, which again, if you're an Indigenous person or a woman or someone of a minority group, a visible minority or disabled, you're not going to see yourself, well, you might, but chances are that at least in the older versions of the marketing material for the skilled trades, you probably don't see yourself reflected there. So it's a really important point that you make. And I think the upshot is that we need employers to take some action here.
Let's go.
Let's go, employers. It's really crucial because, it starts with them, the apprenticeship pathway. What we've been saying for 20 years or more about the apprenticeship pathway is when you're out of high school or you're finishing your high school and you want to become an apprentice, for those that have already bought in, yeah, I'm going to be an apprentice, they need to go out and find an employer to take them on. And we can talk about this later, and we can lead into this now.
Let's talk about it. That's
Okay.
a huge thing for me. And just to segue into it, to kind of go along with all of these conversations I've been having, is not only have people found it as a second choice pathway, most people I've talked to said that it was impossible to try and find a job in the beginning for multiple reasons, but they're knocking on doors and they're not getting the answers they want from these employers. And that, I mean, there's so many reasons there, but what do you think we can do to address that? It's such a big topic.
Yeah, it is. It is a big topic. And like I said, like the apprenticeship pathway starts with employers. So, it's really crucial to have them at the table. And we want to understand at the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, like what are the barriers to hiring first year apprentices, for example. And what we hear for the most part is that because we did 10 roundtables across the country and we heard this at every time last year. Send me someone to knock on my door that has some sort of experience, even just a little, even just a little. And so that almost contradicts what we've been saying to people. So, for example, over the years, we've been telling young people, look, there's university, there's college, there's apprenticeship. Those are the three pathways. If you pick apprenticeship, you can learn while you earn. Like
Right.
you will make money right off the bat. So why don't you pick that one? So then, okay, sure, I'm gonna be an apprentice. And then they, graduate high school and haven't necessarily been told that they should take some sort of skilled trades course or what they used to call shop classes back in my day. A lot of those were canceled somewhere along the way. Like not all the schools have those opportunities to go into a shop class or do some construction or do some electrical, some automotive. So they graduate high school and they knock on an employer door and they say, well, I heard there's a skills gap. You guys need a ton of people. So here I am. And the employers are saying, well, like, where is your experience? I don't want to sign you on as an apprentice right away. That's a huge investment. What if you don't like it? What if I invest in you as an apprentice and then 6 months down the road or a year down the road, you decide to go somewhere else, or you decide it's not for you? So I get that it's a huge investment at the outset. So we need to figure that part out. And I think some of the programs that are addressing that are the pre-apprenticeship programs across the country. They're called different things in different provinces and territories, but essentially what it is you can either in high school or after high school go into a pre-apprenticeship program that doesn't tie you to an apprenticeship, but it gives you some experience within an educational setting, but then you're connected with some employers. So
Hmm.
it takes the onus of training people off of the employers a little bit and puts it back on the educational system. But then it increases the odds that employers, and we've shown this, that the employers will hire the people that have gone through some of these pre-trades programs. But, the question is, if you're really needing so many people, what are you turning people away from? So there is a disconnect. And it's important to understand too that it's not every trade that is in desperate need of more people.
Right.
So depending on where you are in the country and depending on which trade you have an interest in, there might be a wait list. We're telling all these people there's tons of jobs, there's tons of jobs. All you have to do is knock on an employer door and you'll be signed up as an apprentice. So either they go in and the employer's like, come back with some experience, or there's a wait list. So there's mixed messages all over the place. And I remember recently CAF, Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, posted some stats on social media, on Twitter, there's a huge skills gap. And the responses, you can't turn off the comments. And some of the comments were calling BS. People calling BS because they tried to get in and there wasn't any room, there was a wait list. Or they were told, they don't need people. So where is this disconnect coming from? I think we need to be really clear when we say there's a skills gap, to say in which skilled trade, in which career, and then to tell young people that this old adage that you can just get out of high school without any experience, knock on a door and get hired, that's just not going to cut it anymore.
Hmm.
You need to put in some effort and some work to getting some experience. So we need to be a little bit more precise in our messaging, I believe, when we talk about the skills gap, because it can, in some instances, backfire. Like we need the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, has for the last 2 years done a labor market study. So, working with economists and working with statistics, Canada come up with, well, in the next 5 years, where are the gaps specifically? And so welders, cooks, industrial mechanics, those are the top three trades that are already in a deficit in terms of numbers, and they will only get worse. Now, there are others like heavy duty mechanic, millwright, that are sort of on the edge. But when we're talking about a skills shortage, we need to be pretty specific because, for example, electricians, they're pretty full right now in most parts of the country.
Yeah.
So we just really need to be clear. And I guess that goes back to making sure that the young people get the message that there are 300 or so trades.
That's what I was just going to say. If you're pointing people in three directions, it's going to fill up pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not for those three, aren't for everybody. But yeah, just people need to know what to expect. And I think that's where there's a disconnect in the messaging of the apprenticeship pathway.
Yeah, it's interesting how employers focus their resources because when I think of the burden of hiring an apprentice from a financial standpoint and then worried about the attrition of somebody not wanting that career path versus hiring a project manager whose salary is a lot greater, spending months putting them through your training program so they understand how your
Mhm.
company operates, giving them a potential vehicle, a gas card, bonuses. That adds up to quite a few apprentices if you break the numbers down. And the odds of that project manager or that director making a lateral move to another organization because they offered them more money is quite high. And we see it happen all the time.
Yeah,
And it's the same investment. It actually probably costs more. And if that
right.
person's involved in managing a project and you've got to restaff it, that could cause losses on a project. So it's interesting where people's minds gravitate and where they focus their time and attention and resources.
Yeah, and I'm interested to know, and we've done a little bit of research on this recently, is we sent out a survey to see what sorts of apprenticeship supports programs do you access, do you think are the best for your buck? And what came back is that wage subsidies. So employers are telling us, and we need to dig a little bit deeper, that wage subsidies for training apprentices is something that may work. So we need to dig into that a little bit deeper. And I know that the federal government is working on something on that notion. So you take care of the financial part of training apprentices. So I think where we need to do a better job is to hold people accountable. And, maybe we need to start tracking numbers of employers who are hiring apprentices. Now, I know because I've heard from our stakeholders and members, sometimes it's just not possible. Like you don't have any in some of these obscure trades that are waiting in the woodwork. So I get that it's not a one size fits all, but there has to be. I'm a firm believer that where there's a barrier, there's an opportunity and a solution. So just saying that, well, it costs too much and we're afraid of them being poached, and that's why we're not hiring apprentices. In a day where, especially for construction, where federal government is saying that infrastructure spending is going to be how they're expecting to restart the Canadian economy and through large infrastructure projects. Well, okay, that's great, but you need to have the people.
Hmm.
So, apprentices are key. And, at CAF, we did a couple of years ago a business case for employers, and it went really well. And people bought in, and people were like, wow, this is great. For every dollar employers invest, they get $1.47 back in terms of productions and outputs and all that. And that's a really nice number. And that's a really pretty pamphlet on a shelf. But how do we move beyond the rhetoric and get more first year apprentices hired? We need to really tackle that. And maybe, holding employers accountable in terms of numbers of apprentices where it makes sense. People are afraid of the word quotas, and I totally understand because that implies a one size fits all. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying some sort of accountability. And if it's that employers are saying, look, we need better trained people, then let's talk about the entire apprenticeship pathway and stop talking about the young people who can simply get out of school with no experience, knock on an employer door and expect an apprenticeship. Like, let's stop talking about that because honestly, that's how we've been selling it over the last few years.
Yeah. I think unions, at least the electrical union, has ratios that employers are required to stand behind, which I think is a good step.
Absolutely.
It doesn't necessarily address the open shop companies, which, they're not tied to any sort of quota, like you mentioned. But one of the things that comes to mind in all these conversations again is we have different provinces, different territories, different school boards and school districts. We have different types of apprenticeship programs and regulations and hours and all of these things. And in some of my conversations and in just more research, it seems as though like you guys are a fantastic organization. You're doing so much, but you're one organization. And then you've got lots of other small organizations that are all trying to do their own thing. And it seems to me, from my perspective, that we may need to work a little bit more together towards the common mission in creating some sort of standard nationwide that's addressing all of these things that we've been talking about. Do you find that there is almost a bit of, I wouldn't call it competition, but there's almost a bit of underlying competition amongst different organizations to choose their pathway and the things that they're recommending you do over another's?
Yeah, well, I don't think that you can get away from that because of the skills gap there is competition amongst the trades and, amongst, I don't want to say the unions are competing against each other, but everybody is sort of trying to get that next good hire, right? You're never going to get away from that. I think where we need to focus, and like you said, the jurisdictions who manage and have the authority over the apprenticeship programs, like the administration of apprenticeship programs, have their own way of doing things, and they're not all standardized across the country. And so I think that the best way to approach it, and I'm selfishly thinking about the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum here and what we can do,
Yeah.
is okay, so what are the common denominators across the country, across the trades that people can buy into? And I think, the diversity in the skilled trades is one that will address some of the skills gap, the gap, getting more women, getting more Indigenous people into the skilled trades. That's something that everyone can agree with. And I'll use that as an example. There are a lot of programs across the country that are working on this issue. A lot of the provinces are doing some really good work. There's equity groups across the country, the Office to Advance Women Apprentices, Women Building Futures. Like there's some awesome, awesome things going on. But you're right. What's missing is sort of a national collective approach. And that's where CAF, I think, is best suited to play that role. And that's what we tried to do with our Supporting Women in Trades campaign. We've been talking about what can we do as a nation for 2 years now. We had our first Supporting Women in Trades conference in Halifax in 2018 and had one in June in Vancouver. And each time we were gathering more information of what a strategy should look like based on the people with lived experiences. So come last, 6 months ago, we said, well, let's strike a task force and ask people to contribute to the development of something national that everyone could buy into, regardless of your jurisdictional requirements, regardless of your trade, or whether you were union, non-union. And so we had this task force of 60 stakeholders, which is interesting to manage. And they were employers, they were students, colleges, trades instructors, government. Everybody was represented around this table, and they came up with this strategy of things that they thought they could all buy into. So that's the type of work that we need to do. And, other than underrepresented people, addressing the skills gap, I think, is where we can all collectively come together. And through labor market research, like, let's use that. Let's tailor our message together. Maybe work on a common message of the skilled trades. Like, those are the things that we can all buy into together. But it's certainly interesting and challenging to have all these different groups. And especially when there's federal funding available for different projects here and there, then, that gets a little competitive out there. But I think there's a large number of stakeholders that want to come together. And we see it at our board. Our board is made up of 4 different union reps, 4 different provincial governments, 4 different employers, 4 different colleges. And so everyone comes having their own back where they work, their own interests, but they come to the table. And it's all about the collective interest of the skilled trades community. So I am confident that we'll find a way together. But I think that tracking numbers is going to move things a little bit more quickly.
Yeah.
And holding people accountable for those numbers is probably going to get beyond the rhetoric, beyond all this talk that we've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to start seeing how we can do that. And, we've been talking to the federal government about how can they help this skills shortage while staying out of the jurisdiction's authority of apprenticeship. But, what are some of the things they can do? So I'm feeling confident. We don't have all the answers, but people want to come together.
Yeah.
I think that apprenticeship has for a long time been seen as a little bit archaic and old school, right? And the pandemic it's a terrible situation, but one of the silver linings, I suppose, has been that it has thrust the apprenticeship community into an online world. And that in itself might attract more young people to the trades. So a lot of work is going on right now about what we can bring online in terms of apprenticeship.
I think you're right about the numbers. The old saying goes, what you can't measure, you can't manage. And I think that goes a long way with what we're trying to do. Out of curiosity, something that just came to mind, have you guys done any research on other countries and the way their apprenticeship system works, like Germany or Switzerland, where they have like this first class apprenticeship style program?
Yeah. Well, yes, of course. And a lot of people have done tons of comparative work with Germany specifically. And the UK is a bit different because a lot of their careers, even outside of the skilled trades, go through some sort of apprenticeship system. And so there's a bit different. But in Germany, what we see and what people say is that there are a couple things. One, there's a parity of esteem, and that term has been thrown around for years. And what it means is there's a view, a societal view, that doing an apprenticeship is just as important, valued as a doctorate. So they, as a society, don't look down on apprenticeships and the skilled trades. So they've got that going for them. We still have a little bit of work to do, but they do streamline the young people at an earlier age in Germany. And it's not streamlined based on academic potential. It's streamlined based on interest and skill set. And so, at an early age, they can start doing some hands-on skilled trades work, it's grade 6, I think, even earlier maybe.
Wow.
So they just have it set up in terms of 3 very specific streams, and you can jump from one stream to the next, obviously, but they're seen as equal. And the students are, sort of put into one early on. And so they've been very successful in having, their completion rates are fairly high, and they get a lot of apprentices through the program. So there are some takeaways from there, like specifically, how do we get this parity of esteem? And then, this whole issue of streamlining, that's out of my pay scale. Like, that's not for me to make any judgment on, but they just have it set up differently. I think here in Canada, from what I hear, we're trying to get away from streamlining and making it open up to everybody.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure that that's the optimal for us, but yeah, the parity of esteem, how do we get there?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like OYAP is doing quite a good job at getting youth involved as early as grade 10 or 11 and
Yeah,
having them on job sites and all these events. In talking to Connor Keogh, he's an OYAP coordinator, and just the passion he has for what he's doing and seeing all these kids getting into it so early and walking out of high school with hours towards their apprenticeship and getting ticketed at 20 years old is just mind-blowing.
I know. It's amazing. And you're right. OYAP is an amazing program. There are similar programs in other provinces and territories. And so, yes, very, very successful. And you were talking earlier, you were asking me about my inspiring sort of moments. And one of them was recently I had the opportunity to go to a local college, La Cité Collégiale in Ottawa, a French trade school. And, they had all the educators there, the high school educators there, the OYAP people there. And they had brought this young man who started the OYAP program, which is a sort of an apprenticeship while in high school system, at 16, and in plumbing, I believe. And he was sitting on the stage at 18, like talking about his salary, for example. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, he had his own truck, like he had it together. This young man was quite inspiring. Like, I wanted to just clone him, like show him to my kids, be like, see the potential here. Yeah, he was quite the young man and had just such a promising career at such a young age. It was just amazing. Yeah, we need more stories like that.
Yeah.
Like more people to come forward and talk about their amazing experiences. And yeah, it was inspiring.
Yeah. If you're an apprentice and you're listening and you have a story, I'd be more than happy to have you on to tell it. I'd love to speak to more youth and talk about their journeys and showcase it a little bit. So I'll help in whatever way I can. France, we've gone through so much. There's a ton for people to take away. Is there anything you think we left off the table that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, I just appreciate the opportunity to have this chat with you.
As do I.
Yeah. And I think that if we can crack that nut called employer engagement, that would make me so happy. I think that, a lot of things would fall into place. So I commit to doing more outreach to employers and not to, lecture. That's not what I want to do. What I want to do is hear from them. Like, why? Why is it so difficult? What are your options to hiring first year apprentices? Like, what do you need? That's what I want to know. And hopefully, as a national voice, we can take that somewhere and say, here's what employers need to be able to hire first year apprentices or apprentices in general. So I'm hoping that through this show and through further work of CAF, that we're going to make some headway there. But I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to call it what it is, and I'm not afraid to put numbers to it. When I was at the last Supporting Women in Trades conference, to the surprise of my board and my staff, I went on stage and said, I commit to putting a target for women in trades by 2030. I like taking risks when it means that it gets people to chat.
Yeah.
So I'm really confident that we're going to do some really good stuff. And I just appreciate your work on this. And hopefully, in a year down the road or something, we can reconnect and we can talk about some of the stuff that came out of it.
Oh yeah, I look forward to it. I look forward to helping you guys in any way that I can and continuing to push the envelope and asking the tough questions. Just to finish it off before we get into a little bit about membership and CAF itself. Do you have any asks of anybody listening? If anybody's made it this far in the podcast and they're really engaged and they're buying into what you're saying, do you have anything that you'd like to ask them to do or any calls to action?
So, first of all, thank you for making it this far, because that's a big feat for hearing me for the whole time. So, I appreciate your attention to what I have to say. Look, the call to action is if you're an employer, I don't want to say you have to, but hiring apprentices is going to be the future for you. So, we need to think long term collectively. So, I ask that employers think long term. And if there are some barriers that you think needs addressing, let's have that conversation. Reach out to the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. I can leave you my email address. We can put it up somewhere. I want to hear from you. I want to hear why, as an employer, you're not able to hire apprentices. That's the first thing. Two, and again, this goes to employers, please look into bringing into your organization some sort of inclusivity training if you haven't done so already. There are a ton of programs across the country that are available that you can tap into that have already been developed through different organizations. The skilled trades need to be more inclusive. And they're not right now because 4% of the skilled trades workers are women, 4% in 2020.
Wow.
That needs to change. And so there is a role in this change for employers. So bring in some inclusivity training. And for apprentices that are listening to this, I would say educate yourself of all of the supports available for apprentices. Ask questions about, what's available through the federal government or the provincial government. You have to self-advocate. Your career is in your hands, but there are a ton of supports, whether it's learning supports or financial supports. They're out there, but you're going to have to do the work to go and find them.
I love it. So let's end off with, and obviously for anybody listening, usually, as you probably know, I make Toolbox Talk monthly pages. It wraps up the month. But because I love the work that Franz is doing so much and there's too much to pack into a small page, there's going to be a full page available at toolspodcast.com, and it's going to have links to everything that we mentioned, links to get in contact with the CAF or with France herself. And please follow that call to action. Invest a little bit of time, take a bit of time out, and follow those links. Provide your feedback to the organization, and let's see what we can do with it. And to end it off, where can people find out more about the benefits of membership with CAF, and where would you like to point them to get more information or to access resources or anything like that?
So you can access, and I'm hoping that there'll be a link on your website to our website,
Yes, of course.
caf-fca.org. And first of all, there are a ton of free resources for people, for employers, for apprentices, for organizations, for unions. I'm not here to pitch a membership plug. However, we do need to keep the lights on as an organization. So for those of you, who have the resources to become members, there's a link there to join CAF. And what that does is it gives you extra access to member-only research and access to our, inner network of sharing of best practices. But if anything, I would rather have everybody go to the website and just see what's on there. And if you feel like it's good stuff and you want more, then let's chat about membership, because we'd love to hear from you. And, whenever there's an opportunity to participate in a survey, please do. That's how we get our information.
I love it. France, Daviault, you're a rock star. I had such a fun time just talking to you, and I love the passion and the enthusiasm that you take for an industry that you weren't even a part of until you found your way into it. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing for all of us in the skilled trades and in all the other pathways that you support. So thank you again so much for joining me on the Tools of the Trade Monthly Toolbox Talk.
Thanks for having me, Colin. It was a pleasure.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Tools of the Trade podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. For show notes, blog posts, resources, and access to our newsletter, check out toolspodcast.com.